So, David, welcome to my channel, Jamie Brewster's Musical Heroes. Guys, today I've got the amazing David Leaf, who,
It's just David Lee.
oh, yes, we'll forget the amazing. Well, to me, yeah, just David Leaf, just ordinary David. Prof from UCLA, professor at UCLA, at the Herb Alpert School of Music, and writer, biographer, filmmaker, album note writer, maybe other things as well. So thanks, David, very much for joining us today. It's
Happy to be there when you describe all that. Amazing is a good word.
Yeah, and you don't look
I,
bad on it, really, do you? Well
that's
done,
just
you.
genetic luck.
Yeah, exactly. I know what you mean. So, what we're going to do, David has got a new book coming out, and I'm going to show David's new book. It's not actually, I haven't got it yet because being here in Spain, deliveries are slow. But this is the book, Smile, The Rise, Fall, and Resurrection of Brian Wilson. Wow, incredible. I'm looking forward to getting the book. But in the meantime, David, I wonder if you could give a little thumbnail of yourself, maybe a little bit of a background of because I think, if I just say, I think we've got two amazing journeys here. I think it's your amazing journey and it's Brian's amazing journey. Two amazing journeys. And maybe you could start with a little thumbnail of yourself, uh,
Sure.
and then maybe launch into the book. Let's see how it goes. So much we can talk about.
Well, I think in the book that came out in 2022, I gave a lot of information about myself in the update,
Okay,
a massive update um,
sure.
of the original book, The Beach Boys and the California Myth. So the thumbnail is I was born in New York. I grew up in my favorite group, without question, to this day, is the Beatles,
Okay.
which always surprises people when I say that. But how could the Beatles not be your favorite group of all time?
Hmm.
I guess unless you were a Stones fan or a Who fan, that'd be acceptable. But
Okay.
at any rate, so I was a pop music fan. I loved hit records, hit radio, and uh, I had a little transistor radio that I would listen to at night. I can remember going with my brother to buy records when maybe I was 6 years old. I think the first record we
Wow. Was your
bought,
brother older than you or younger?
my older brother,
Your older
I,
brother.
I, I think we bought "Come Go with Me" by the Dell Vikings,
Okay.
and I just loved pop music. And God only knows, Brian Wilson made the greatest pop music pretty much ever.
Yeah.
So, but I was not a Beach Boys hardcore fan in the 60s. I did go to see them in concert once in 1967.
Right.
It was a show in the old days of Beach Boys concerts where they played about 25 to 30 minutes.
Okay.
And I remember when I went with friends of mine from the bowling team. And I remember when the lights went up, um, my friends got up to to leave. I thought they were going to get refreshments. I thought it was intermission. They were saying, "No, the concert's over."
That's it.
I was going. I was used to
Wow.
going to, say, the Broadway show where there'd be an hour and then an intermission
Sure.
and then another 40 minutes maybe. So I was just stunned at how short it was,
Mm.
but they were great. Now I knew nothing about them. I never knew the name Brian Wilson until I read an article in Rolling Stone magazine in 1971,
Yeah. Yeah.
written by a guy named Tom Nolan,
Yeah.
um, and that changed my life forever. Up till then, I was on my way to being a sports writer and a sportscaster.
Okay.
And when I read this article, heard the Surf's Up album, and then went to see the Beach Boys in concert, all within about a period of a week,
Incredible.
I was just stunned. I was stunned by the Surf's Up album, especially the last two songs, Till I Die and Surf's Up.
Hmm.
When I heard Till I Die, it was reminiscent of, say, In My Room or The Warmth of the Sun. And
Mm.
I thought to myself, well, he still can do it.
Yeah.
So what I had read in Rolling Stone was he was a recluse and he wasn't all that involved with the records, etc. And
Mm.
then I heard Surf's Up, which was going to be one of the centerpiece songs of Smile. And I thought to myself, well, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Why would anybody not want this music to come out?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
And my roommate and I became obsessed, absolutely obsessed with Brian and the Beach Boys. And I was in my youthful outrage period.
Yeah. Okay.
And I remember him saying to me, "Well, if you're so upset about all this," because I was a journalist, I was studying journalism. He said, "If you're so upset, why don't you do something about it?"
Brilliant. What advice? That's an incredible bit of advice.
It is good advice. And so what I said, you know what, I'm going to move to California, write a book about Brian Wilson, become his friend, and help him finish Smile.
That is, to hear those words from you again is just incredible. Um, what a vision. What a step to take in life. And to say I might be able to do this. I might even be able to do that is
I
incredible.
I I had nothing but overconfidence.
Okay.
There was no reason in the world that I'd be able to do any of that. When I was in college, on the first day of class, the professor would say, "We're going to have a midterm and a final." And if he said there's going to be a term paper of like 1,000 words, I would drop the class. No way I was going to work that hard on a
I
1,000 words. What are you, crazy?
love that.
And so I remember when I signed the book contract in 1977, and I don't remember whether it was 70,000 words or 80,000 words, whatever it was, I didn't hesitate, uh,
Yeah,
but because this was a dream come true.
sure.
Now the story to how I got to that book is a long and convoluted one. But I talk to my students in my classes about, did you play with dominoes when you were a kid?
Yeah.
So you would set up a row of dominoes in all sorts of patterns, and you
Mm,
tip the first one over, and it would make
yeah.
it would this line would go over. If you take out a couple of those dominoes,
Yeah.
none of it happens.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Exactly.
go
Yeah.
all the way.
Yeah. Incredible. Yeah.
And so it seems to me that this journey that I've been on was it was a mission, it was a calling, and it was a miraculous row of dominoes.
Mm. Mission and a calling. I think they're two great words. Great words. Full of spirituality and maybe divine, even, you know, um, because,
Well, well, it's divine in the sense that if Brian says he's writing a teenage symphony to God,
yeah,
and I hear a few of the songs before I moved to California and don't disagree with what he said, that he's inspired, that he feels the music is being channeled through him,
yeah,
and he's writing this for the God he believes in.
yeah,
Who am I to argue with that?
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so when I moved to California, really with no prospects whatsoever, other than it was cheaper to live in LA than New York.
Okay. Fair dues.
I was okay. The question was, where am I going to be a starving writer?
Yeah.
And so in New York in those days, New York was going bankrupt.
Uh-huh.
You could get a fifth floor rat trap, roach infested walk up in some scary neighborhood
Oh
for
no.
maybe $500 or $600 a
I
month.
don't think I would do that. No.
And or you could move to California and get a small apartment near the ocean for a couple $100 a month. And I said, you know what? I think I'm going with near the ocean.
Good move. Brilliant.
and and I moved there, and the first place I stayed was at a friend's apartment. She was living with her parents. I slept on the couch
Okay.
while I was looking for an apartment.
Okay.
That place was 1 block from the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium where the Beach Boys had played in the Tammy show.
Yeah.
I arrived on a Saturday night. Uh, Monday morning, I went to the California State of Unemployment Insurance Division to transfer my claim from New York to California.
Okay.
$95 a month, which was enough money to actually live on in those days.
Okay. Great.
Not live all that well,
Sure.
but live on. and I walked in there, did the paperwork, and I came out. That building was at the corner of Fifth and Broadway in Santa Monica, southwest corner.
Okay.
And I crossed the street heading north, and walking towards me was Dennis Wilson.
Wonderful.
And as I said, I was nothing if not overconfident. I walked up to him, no fear. I said, "Hi, Dennis. My name is David Lee. I just moved to California to write a book about your brother Brian." And his reaction was, he went like, good luck. And then he went into a building, a low brick building, which I later found out was Brother's studio.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if we talk about, people talk about serendipity and fate and all
Mm,
these things.
mm,
Well, if I had moved to California, nothing could have happened.
of
But
course.
to meet Dennis within 36 hours
Uh,
was pretty stunning.
remarkable.
Then then about and by the way, the corner where we met, I ended up living in an apartment just a few blocks away for 39 years in Santa Monica.
Okay.
Um, a place that Brian used to come to um, when we have holiday parties, and we'd have karaoke, and he'd love to get up and sing.
Brilliant.
I mean, it's just, he's just a regular guy
Yeah.
who happens to have a remarkable talent. At
Mm.
any rate, 3 years from the date of that conversation with Dennis Wilson, my first book was in stores.
Oh, it's amazing.
And as I said, it's a long story to how that all happened. But within 8 months of that first meeting with Dennis, I was at the local YMCA uh, shooting baskets with a friend of mine from college. And onto the court walked two guys saying, "Do you want to play 2-on-2?" One of the guys was named Stan Love.
Oh, yeah.
He had just retired from the NBA,
Mhm,
having had a successful career in college and the pros.
mhm.
Mike Love's brother, and with him was Brian Wilson.
Unbelievable.
Completely unbelievable. And the whole time we're playing, I'm thinking to myself, are my friends back east going to believe this?
No.
I mean, we didn't have cell phones to take a picture with in those days. It was just like,
Sure.
it was a snapshot in your mind. Um, and so that was the first time I met Brian.
Because there is another story about him coming to your place when he was in the middle of the road or something, and I thought that was the first time, but this was the first time. So did you get a good rapport with him at that time?
I
You
got no
know,
rapport with them whatsoever.
no,
We played
you
basketball and then they
that
left.
was it. Yeah,
What I can tell the basketball fans watching is that he was all offense, no D.
really.
He would get the ball and
Wow.
shoot it right away.
Really, yeah.
Now you have to remember Brian was a terrific athlete in high school.
Yeah, for sure.
He was quarterback of his football team. He
Hmm.
could throw the ball 65 yards. He
Yeah,
was the center fielder of his baseball team. He could hit a ball 350, 400 feet. He could
yeah.
throw it on a line a couple of 100 feet.
Super.
He ran track.
Yeah,
And if you look at the early Beach Boys albums with the notion of him being an athlete, you see a long, lean guy.
yeah,
Later
definitely.
on, he obviously put on some weight.
Yeah.
Anyway, the next time I met Brian was at Beach Boys' 15th anniversary concert at the LA Forum.
Okay.
By then, I had done a story on the group for the Anaheim Bulletin
Mhm.
in advance of their 4th of July concert at the Anaheim Stadium. And for that article, it was a preview article, I had gone to Santa Barbara and interviewed Mike Love. So now I'd met Dennis, now I'd met Mike.
Fantastic.
And so I knew the publicist, and I was invited to the post-concert party, and the pictures from that party ended up on the inner sleeve of the Beach Boys' "Love You" album.
Superb.
Um,
Amazing.
so I didn't really there was no rapport that night with Brian either. I'm sure I
No, sure.
tried to. A few months later at Brothers Studio, which I now understood was the place where I had met Dennis, there on April Fool's Day 1977, there was a listening party for the new album The Beach Boys Love You, and I was invited to that. And I remember standing at the piano while Brian was playing. While the album was playing, he was playing music that had nothing to do with the album. It was kind of disruptive, to say the
Yeah.
least.
Yeah. Mhm.
Still no rapport, but I was standing over him like an acolyte, watching what he was doing.
Mm. Wow.
Um, I spoke to Dennis that day because I gave Dennis a copy of first issue of Pet Sounds, my
The
fanzine
pansy. Yeah.
that I published in 77 and 78. And it
Mm.
was that fanzine that led to long convoluted story how I got my book contract. So Dennis is looking at the fanzine like, what the heck is this? Something called Pet Sounds. And Dennis and I struck up a rapport.
Good.
And later that year, I was invited to a recording session of his, and invited back to his house afterwards, where we spent a good 5 or 6 hours talking.
Is that when you did the interview through the night with him?
That's when I did that interview
Could
through the
I
night.
could I ask which, can you remember the tracks that you witnessed, or the track that you witnessed being recorded at the studio?
Yes, he was recording a song called "He's a Bum,"
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and he had a bunch of journalists there singing background, including me,
Including you. Yeah.
and our line was, "He's a dog without a bone,"
Oh yeah.
and and
Amazing.
um, and so when the fanzine comes out, Brian's girlfriend at the time, Debbie Kyle,
Mm.
gets a copy of it, and she gets in touch with me somehow. And after I got the book contract, I started talking to her because nothing about the Beach Boys story makes sense. Nothing made sense when I was writing the book.
Okay.
To this day, nothing really makes sense. It's
Mm.
why I named the last book God Only Knows,
Yeah.
because it's like that's often the answer to the question, why did this happen? And the answer,
Mm.
God only knows. There's just no
No
explanation
explanation.
for a lot of it. And we were just a couple of years after the Watergate scandal here in the United States, where a source named Deep Throat had provided the information that Woodward and Bernstein needed to break open the Watergate scandal,
Hmm.
and I nicknamed Debbie Beach Throat
Okay.
because I could call her and ask her any manner of questions. She had worked for the Beach Boys for a year. Um, she knew them. She had spent time around them, and certainly with Brian. She also had a roommate who loved Brian, and so when I would call to talk to Debbie, if Debbie wasn't around, I would talk to her roommate, and her roommate was really smart, and I would ask her questions, and she would have deep answers as to why something might have happened. And I would say 30 or 40 phone calls. They always ended with me asking her out on a date, always ended with her saying no.
Oh,
And then one day she said, wait a second. Um, Next week is Halloween. You can bring over a pumpkin.
oh,
And
okay.
being the lovesick puppy that I was,
Yeah.
I went and bought a pumpkin. Pumpkin rang their doorbell, and she opened the door just wide enough to take the pumpkin, say thank you, and disappear
No,
behind it.
that was mean. Terrible.
Well, eventually, what she and Debbie realized was I was writing this book about Brian, and the notion of interviewing Brian they knew would be fruitless
Yeah.
because he was such a terrible interviewee.
Mm.
So they said, why don't you come over when he's over here and have dinner with us and just get to spend some time with him, just get
Oh,
to know him as a person.
amazing.
So that's really when I got to know him.
Oh, great. That's great. And you found him lucid and, fairly sociable or not?
I would say introverted, completely
Yeah.
lucid. Brian is so smart
Yeah.
and so sharp and no, and is so deep
Mm.
beyond all our imagination. And one of my favorite stories in Smile, the Rise and Fall, Resurrection of Brian Wilson. I interviewed about 25 people for this book that I had already interviewed.
Okay.
And I was talking to John Warren, who was the Beach Boys road manager for many, many years and also worked as Brian's road manager,
Yeah.
tour
Okay.
manager.
Tour manager.
Um,
Yeah.
and he told a story that he loved. He said he and Brian are backstage just having a great conversation. And somebody walked into the room who Brian didn't know. And Brian went completely silent, kind
Yeah.
of stone faced,
Right.
didn't want to engage with this stranger. The
Uh,
moment the stranger left the room, Brian picked up the conversation exactly where it was. So you had to earn his trust.
yeah. Sure.
But because by the time I met him, he had been burned every which way imaginable.
Yeah. Hmm. Was Landy involved at that point? Was that around that time or?
When I first met him on the basketball court and at the Landy was involved. I think he was gone by the time of Beach Boys Love You.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Amazing. And so I guess what I'd like to hear a little bit, I know you've been through this probably a million times. Obviously, we've got to go to a little bit back to the Smile times of 66, 67. If we could have
Sure,
a little sort of session on that, David, that would be great because
absolutely.
the myth, I mean, I heard little cassette recordings of Smile bits in the early 80s
Right.
and it blew my mind. I mean, I knew about Surf's Up, Cool Cool Water, um,
Evanescence, Our
Vegetables,
Prayer, wonderful.
Prayer. I mean, all phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, all of them. But these other little bits and pieces, I think I picked them up with the Beach Boys convention. Used to be Beach Boys conventions in the UK. Used to go to every.
Sure.
And
Beach
I know,
Boys Stomp.
yeah,
Yeah,
Mick
no, I
Grant,
was I'm
Andrew
still
Doe,
mates with Mike Grant and Andrew
Mick
Doe.
Grant,
Sure.
Andrew Doe. You haven't seen them for years and years. Yeah, we used to go, and I think I missed one year, and Brian turned up. How on earth did that happen? Missed that one. Blast. And he
So
was
so
brilliant. So going
so
back to the 60s. Sorry, David.
so
Yes.
what I looked for when I was researching the original book, and when I made the film Beautiful Dreamer,
Mm.
um, and of course with the new book, was people who could speak authoritatively about what was going on in Brian's world.
Yeah,
So, for example, I spoke to Rich Sloan, who was one of Brian's best friends in high school. I
sure.
spoke to Fred Vale, who was the Beach
Oh,
Boys' first
great
concert
guy.
promoter.
Yeah.
I got lucky in that when I was doing my first book, Bruce Johnston had left the Beach Boys, and never anticipated that he was going to be going back. So I got a really candid interview from him.
Yeah.
Um, when it came to the Smile era, nobody was really happy to talk about it.
Mm.
But I talked to the studio musicians about what Brian did that was so special, and Van Dyke Parks, and the person who really opened up and explained it as best as it could be explained was David Anderley,
Oh, yeah.
who was Brian's dear friend in that era.
What a lovely guy. He's just and in Beautiful Dreamer, doesn't he come over as a fantastic guy? You couldn't help but love him, and
Yes, absolutely. He was a true friend to Brian, a true friend to Smile, and
yeah,
sadly we lost him a few years ago.
I know. Yeah.
But ironically, I did a project for A&M Records back, I think it was 86 or 87, and they gave me my office in at A&M Records Studios was right next to his.
Oh, great.
So we got to just hang out and talk.
Yet another domino in place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I heard from people like Danny Hutton and David was that my first book was on the money.
Okay, great.
There were people who didn't think so, that thought it was biased. And I'll admit to a pro Brian Wilson bias. I don't think there's anything
Hmm.
wrong with that
Nor do I.
because if Sir George Martin and Sir Paul McCartney and Sir Elton John and Sir
Yeah.
Barry Gibb and a whole host of other music legends say Brian Wilson is the greatest, who am I to argue with any of them?
for sure. Mm,
And so I've been honored to talk to all of them about Brian, work with all of them about Brian.
superb. Yeah,
And I mean, when George Martin said to me that Sergeant Pepper was our attempt to equal Pet Sounds, accent on the word attempt.
yeah, yeah,
That gives you a sense of how important and influential Brian was in '66 with both Pet Sounds and Good Vibrations. So when the endless woulda, shoulda, coulda questions come up about what would have happened if Brian had put out Smile before Sergeant Pepper, I think that goes right to the heart of it. If Pet
yeah,
Sounds had that big an impact on the Beatles, who knows what the impact of them on Smile would have been, but it would have been gigantic.
yeah. I've asked that question to myself and other people's loads of times, and I can never quite get there because what would you have followed that with? It would have, and I mean, in those sessions, the Beach Boys sang like angels, and Brian got them to do
Absolutely.
it. He got them to do it somehow or other because there was resistance, of course, and we'll obviously talk a little bit about why it didn't happen. And I'm sure you've got a lot of answers, or some of them. But they sang so well, and because at Pet Sounds, I think he said, "We're going to do this. We're going to do it. We're going to finish it." And um, you know, some of the guys didn't like it. The brothers, I think, supported him, but maybe not so much Mike and Al. I don't know. Bruce, I don't know.
Well, we don't have a time machine.
No,
We don't have forensic
no,
psychology.
no.
But what David Anderley said that I think is key to all of this is that he says to Brian, for Brian, support was critical,
Yeah,
100% support. What
yeah,
Van Dyke Park says is Brian had earned the right to do these musical experiments, to do this art
for
rock.
sure, for sure.
And there was resistance from the record company to Pet Sounds. There was resistance within the group. And I think that resistance, when I was a self-righteous 25-year-old, I would have felt differently. But now I'm an elder statesman. And if one puts themselves in the shoes that they were in
Yeah,
1966,
yeah.
and thinks, wait a second, they're 22,
The kids,
21, 20. They're
young.
kids
Yeah,
who are rich and famous because of the
right.
hits.
Yeah,
They've all got homes, they've got wives
mm,
and ex-wives.
yeah.
And, what is this going to do to us? How is this going to affect us?
Quite.
So it's easy as a 25-year-old to say, yes, um, he should have done it. Yes, he was on the right track. Yes, everything he did was magnificent and beautiful. But also, yes, it scared the hell out of them.
Yeah, yeah.
It also didn't help that the record company
Mm,
hated the direction he was taking the group. They sabotaged the sales of Pet Sounds in the United States.
yeah,
Uh, and not different in England. England welcomed it with open arms
for
and
sure.
made it the big deal that it should have been in the States.
Definitely, yeah.
And so Smile was, one could argue with Pet Sounds, these songs are clearly about something. I call it Brian Wilson's emotional autobiography.
Mm,
But that's why it's so intimate and why it resonates with generation after generation.
mm,
As Sir Paul McCartney told me in 1990, no one is musically educated till they've heard Pet Sounds.
yeah.
Well, that's a pretty big
Wonderful.
statement.
A huge statement. Yeah, definitely.